Anyway, my name's Slade Stuttle. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. Struggle with drug addiction, sex addiction, control issues, anxiety, and passive-aggressive behavior. I was born on August 7th, 1993, at Fort Hood Army Hospital to two parents in the Army. 22 months later, my little brother was born. My parents were always busy and seemed like they never had time for us, so my brother and I quickly learned how to fend for ourselves. We were all the other had for most of my early childhood. When I was 4 years old, we moved to Germany. This is where my first addiction started. I don't remember how young I was, but we had some neighbors that had two daughters about my age. We used to go in the basement of our apartment building, and I got taught how to play Truth or Dare, which quickly became experimenting sexually with each other. When I was 8 years old, my mom got out of the Army and we moved back to our hometown in Louisiana, Pine Prairie. My grandparents were heavily involved in church, so I became involved quickly. I thrived at church. It was a place where everyone finally paid attention to me and praised me for how quickly I picked up on Bible knowledge and how God-fearing I was for my young age. But in the meantime, I had brought the games of Truth or Dare I had grown to love back home to my cousins. This is where I learned to start living my double life. I was excelling in church and knowledge of religion, but also the ringleader of what I now consider childhood molestation. I was only 8. When I was 10 years old, I preached a sermon from the pulpit that I don't remember, but to this day, people still tell me that they remember it being such a powerful sermon and being amazed that it could come from someone so young. Also at 10 years old, I discovered air duster. I started huffing it because it made my voice sound deep and funny, but I kept huffing it because it made me feel high. I didn't have to worry about pleasing anyone or having to earn God's or others' love by performing well in church. I could huff air duster and be completely comfortable without a care in the world. I continued excelling in church. I started going on mission trips every summer, but I continued to molest my cousins and continued to get high. Slowly, the shame and guilt of this double life and the pressures of having to perform at church for attention and praise took a toll on me, and I had become depressed and made statements about suicide to my parents several times, but they always just shrugged it off as not a big deal, saying things like, "I'm just a kid, my life couldn't possibly be that bad," or I was just being dramatic because things weren't going my way. When I was 14 years old, I made a statement to my dad that I wanted to kill myself. He handed me a loaded pistol and said, "If you're going to do it, then just do it." This memory still plays in my head over and over to this day. I ran inside crying and began to curse God. If everything I was taught was true, then why did I have parents who didn't love me, and why was I addicted to sex and drugs at only 14 years old? From this point forward, I made it a goal to do everything I could to go against God. I began playing music with a lot of older guys and started smoking pot, and from day one, I smoked every single day after and became a daily user. I wore black, painted my fingernails black, wore black makeup, and even burned a Bible on occasion. By the time I was 15, I had been introduced to hard drugs and was doing literally any drug I could get my hands on. This is also when I was introduced to drug dealing. I still went to church and summer camps and went on mission trips during this time, but now I only went because I was forced to by my family. And now at church, my goals were completely different. I didn't want to excel in church, I wanted to destroy the church. I felt like if I could sell drugs to the guys in the youth group and have sex with the girls in the youth group, it would be a slap in God's face. So that's what I tried to do, all the while maintaining a very good church mask in front of adults. When I was 16 years old, I overdosed on morphine, and I went to my first rehab. I hated every second of it. I remember blaming God that I was so young and so addicted, and blaming Him for the way I felt. I never wanted to be sober, and I relapsed the day I got out of rehab. I continued dealing drugs and doing hard drugs daily through the remainder of high school. The summer after high school, my high school sweetheart broke up with me because the drugs and the lies and the cheating were too much for her to handle. I became suicidal once again, and for the first time in years, turned to God for help. I decided on the spur of a moment to go to a Christian college far away from home in Northeast Arkansas and major in Bible. I wouldn't know anyone, and I wouldn't have access to drugs because it was a Christian school. I quickly began to excel in school because of my knowledge in biblical and religious things, but it didn't take me long to find the party and begin drinking and smoking weed again. I still went to class as a Bible major and did well. Soon the alcohol and weed became cocaine and Molly, and going to raves 45 minutes away in Memphis, and staying out all night and skipping class and sleeping all day. I got kicked out of school for my dramatic drop in grades and lack of attendance. When I had come back home, my parents were so disappointed I didn't want to live with them because of the constant ridicule. I moved in with my grandma, worked at McDonald's, partied constantly, and had no desire to ever do anything else for the rest of my life. Right before my 19th birthday, I had ripped off and stole from so many people that I felt like my life was threatened just by living here. I had a best friend from high school living in Florida with his brother who let me move in with them. They knew I did drugs and they did drugs too, but they had no idea how bad my addiction actually was. After only about a month of stealing from them, not having a job, and always using their drugs, they kicked me out. That night I went to a drum circle on the beach with a friend I had met, and while there met a beautiful girl from Indiana. We hooked up and she introduced me to using meth intravenously. For the next few weeks, we shot up meth and lived on the beach. I was 19 years old and homeless without a care in the world because I was constantly high. This girl told me she had a friend that would let us live in a walk-in closet for food stamps every month, so we moved in. A boyfriend from Indiana moved in soon after, and the four of us became best friends. I learned how to cook meth, and we began dealing mass amounts of the drugs. We all heavily practiced the occult and did daily tarot card readings. We did seances, practiced divination, and witchcraft of every sort. I completely turned my back on God again. I remember asking the devil himself to make me rich and successful, and that's exactly what he did, or so I thought. None of us had jobs, but all the bills were paid. We were using meth and synthetic marijuana daily and doing acid or PCP every weekend. One day, we came up with the idea that if we moved to Indiana, our business could take off and we would be even richer. The two originally from Indiana and I packed up and left on a 14-hour drive with a meth lab in the trunk, while the girl from Florida decided to stay there. Once we got to Indiana, I met a girl and moved in with her. This meant my friends and I could no longer conduct business 24/7. I was quickly kicked out of the group, and when I ran out of drugs and money, my girlfriend at the time broke up with me, kicked me out of her house. After spending a few nights on the street in the Indiana winter, I went to the library and messaged my mom on Facebook telling her everything that had happened. After not talking to her for almost a year, she bought me a bus ticket home. When I got home, she told me I couldn't live with her unless I went to rehab, so of course I found somewhere else to live. The drug use continued, and I went house to house, couch to couch. Finally, I ended up at my girlfriend from high school's house, the only girl I had ever truly loved. She told me in order for us to be together, I had to go to rehab, so I went to rehab for her, not for me. Bad idea. Just before turning 20, I found myself in Baton Rouge in my second rehab after having been homeless, shooting up, and being a big-time meth cook. All I thought was that I was way too young. Once again, I blamed God. How could he let this happen? Even though I was the one who had cursed and blasphemed him and turned my back on him, God still showed me his love and grace and the power of his forgiveness. The rehab I was in was faith-based, and I had grown closer to God here than I ever had before. For the first time in my life, I felt God's presence. God was tangible and lived in my heart. He wasn't just some knowledge in my head. My relationship with my girlfriend from high school had gotten better, and I fully planned on marrying the girl. When she told me she found someone else and it just wasn't going to work between me and her no matter how good I did, I was devastated. I left the rehab and relapsed because I had put all my hope in our relationship and based my recovery on our relationship instead of God. So when our relationship failed, I failed, but once again blamed God as if he had let me down. I moved in with my grandma and things got really bad this time around. I quickly started using synthetic marijuana daily and using meth and PCP regularly. But now I wasn't selling drugs, so I turned to things like stealing from businesses and robbing people to make money. I even wrote a couple of hot checks in my grandma's name. I moved in with another girl who begged me not to do drugs in her house or around her kids, but I couldn't even follow those two simple rules. March 1st, 2014, one of my best friends I had known my whole life and grew up going to church with was drinking and driving. He got in a terrible accident and died, and I used this as an excuse for my drug use to increase. It was the Saturday before Mardi Gras, and the next 5 days I was using meth and/or PCP nonstop. The girl I was living with convinced me that I had fell off the deep end and needed to go to rehab. I didn't even get to go to my friend's funeral, and that still really messes with me even today. I went to a rehab in Houston that was supposed to be one of the best in the country. While there, I met yet another woman, and we decided we didn't need rehab, we only needed each other. We left the rehab and moved in together. We were both meth addicts, and within a few weeks were shooting up together. I found out she had a boyfriend who was paying all her bills, and he didn't like the idea of me living there, so I had to go. I had nowhere to go, and I didn't know anything about Houston, so I walked around downtown and didn't sleep that night. The next day I met a few homeless people who shared a meal with me, and we quickly became friends. I learned to adapt quickly to the homeless lifestyle once again, and was shooting up meth and smoking crack daily, breaking into houses, stealing cars, and ripping off anyone and everyone I could to support my habit. I was arrested on 4 different occasions and overdosed during this period of time, and each of the times someone reached out to me and offered me to go to a rehab or a homeless shelter, but I always turned them down and went back to the streets. One night, while it was raining and I couldn't find shelter, I cried to God. I told him plain and simple, God, if you're real, I won't be homeless tomorrow. The next morning, I went to a homeless mission that would feed about 800 homeless people on any given day. I was in a long line, and out of about 800 people, a man walked directly up to me, handed me a flyer, and said, "Brother, you look like you need to get off the streets," and then walked off. I knew it was God. I called the number on the flyer, and later that day went to my 4th rehab at only 21 years old. It was a faith-based ministry, and once again, I was on fire for God. I was playing music on Sunday mornings and even giving them a Bible study on occasion. After 6 months in this program, I was faced with a choice to stay and work for the program or go back to Louisiana. I wish I would have stayed and regret my decision at times, but I moved in with my grandma and vowed to stay sober. I started going to 12-step meetings called Celebrate Recovery to help me stay strong. I thought I had my addiction under control and signed up to join the Navy. I was supposed to go to MEPS on the Monday after Mother's Day. The weekend before, I decided to hang out with some old friends I hadn't seen in a while and say goodbye before leaving for the military. A friend told me she would give me some gas money if I brought her to pick up some meth. Once again, I couldn't turn down a beautiful woman, and maybe deep down I couldn't turn down the opportunity to use. When it came time for her to give me the money for gas, I asked her if she would pay me in the drug instead. She agreed without a second thought, and my career in the Navy went down the drain. This brought a lot of shame and guilt because I had been sober for so long and grown so close to God. I started attending CR faithfully again, and I also found another girlfriend again. I told myself being in a relationship would fix everything and give me a reason not to use. I would smoke pot occasionally, but I rationalized my use by saying it's not really a drug and it kept me from using other drugs. And I still considered myself to be sober. Soon the weed wasn't enough, and I went out and used meth again. When my girlfriend found out, she didn't hesitate to break up with me. This gave me an excuse to use excessively again. I got in touch with old friends, and the next few weeks were filled with excessive meth, crack, and PCP use, and a massive drug dealing operation. A friend had tipped me off that she was a CI, and the house we were dealing out of was about to get brought down, so it was in my best interest to run because the police were on their way. I took off walking down the highway as I saw cop cars swarm the house I had been dealing out of. I remember constantly throwing up and praying the whole time, telling God, if you don't let me get arrested, I promise to go to CR every single night they have it. Just please don't let me get arrested. Over and over. The chief of police found me passed out in a ditch, told me to get in his truck. At first I was very reluctant, but he assured me that I was someone else's problem and not his, and that I would get in the truck if I knew what was best for me. He knew my grandparents and brought me back to their house. After sleeping for 3 days straight, I started going to meetings regularly and was told about a program called the Extra Mile and asked if I wanted to move into a recovery house. I prayed about it and knew it was my only option. I had to be put in a position where I was held accountable and didn't have the opportunity to use. At first, I had a hard time accepting Jesus' love and forgiveness and felt nothing but shame. But I now realize it is because of his love and forgiveness that I am sober. I have proven time and time again I do not have enough power or strength to stay sober. It is through his power and his strength I am sober. I am a junkie, a sex and relationship addict, and a thief with a heart full of bitterness, resentment, envy, malice, and hate. But by the blood of Jesus and his grace, love, and forgiveness, I am redeemed and set free from all those things. I have been sober 68 days today. I've been sober 68 days today, and that is a true miracle. It is all because of Jesus. All I did was accept the gift he has freely given to me, and he could set any one of you free if you are willing to accept his gift of love and grace. All you have to do is say yes to him. He has already done the rest for you on the cross. Thank you.